Hello, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. We're just going to let people slowly funnel in here over the next minute or so. But if you are here joining us, we'd love to know where you're calling in from or what fan base or property you are keeping your eye on. But let us know in the chat where you're calling in from. Do we have people from the US, Canada, overseas? Where are you calling in from? And Mexico City. That is a great first answer. Mexico
Absolutely.
City represented. The Netherlands. Wow, we're going very global. I love it. Good thing that we're talking about global fan bases. Anybody else? Where are you dialing in from? I see a couple of names that are from Toronto,
Amsterdam, very nice.
Amsterdam. Wow, we got a solid mix. Worcester in the
The
UK.
UK.
Very cool. Good. Sounds like we've got some good representation from all over already. We will probably just give it 30 seconds and then we'll get right into it. Let us know if you're with us and throwing things in the chat. What sport property are you most bullish on right now as we think about 2025? Who do you think is going to see the most explosive growth? What property do you think has it figured out before we get into kind of the findings of what consumers are telling us? Any predictions, any properties that are standing out to you guys?
Everybody's going to say boxing.
Boxing,
Just
boxing's having a moment, or
yeah, Jake
a
Paul, good
weekend at
showing.
least. Nobody wants to make a prediction. NBA, okay, that's a fair prediction. Very cool. Okay, well, we'll get things going, and I'm sure we'll have more people roll in. Thank you for joining us. We know that webinars have been maybe almost overdone, but we continue to do them on a kind of every other month basis, and we continue to hear back from you that you're enjoying them. And we really appreciate kind of the insight that you're providing us in terms of what you want us to cover off. We try to keep these things fresh and insightful so that you're gaining something from the experience and the time. And obviously we appreciate you guys joining in. So coming off the last one, we had really talked about, and some of the interesting feedback we got were that people wanted to talk about global fan bases. So that's obviously what we're going to talk about today. A few quick housekeeping notes. As I said, thank you for joining us. You'll all get a recording. If people aren't here on your teams or you want to share the recording, please do go for it. The content is to be shared. Ask questions, give us your comments, your hot takes, whatever you want to say. We want to hear it. We just ask that people kind of keep it respectful, which probably should go without saying. And we encourage you to check out some of the free industry resources that we've produced to help guide data-driven decision making. You can actually see on the next slide some of the things that we've been building out. So over the last 6 to 8 months, and really kind of the impetus for us starting these webinars, we launched a benchmark report, has insight on 500 plus different sponsorships that we've measured on our own dime across the globe to help give you the insights that you need to know what the benchmarks of success look like, how good is good, how bad is bad. There is a very real spread between a good result, a great result, and a bad one. And the data is there so that you can see how you stack up what your benchmark of success should look like. The second thing we did was around the valuation, fair market value, this black box that we talk about on a daily basis of what is a sponsorship really worth. We've literally provided you with a data-driven, consumer-driven model that creates a transparent price point for any sport property in the US. We also have data coming from Canada, from the UK, and around the globe. So if you have a property that you're interested in getting that investment guidance on, let us know. And if it's a US-based sports team, the data is there in our platform at sponsorpulse.com for the taking. And lastly, we've done a lot of work on celebrity and influencer. We'll talk a bit about that today as well, and the role of athletes. But we know that there's a rising movement that's accelerating quickly in terms of where dollars are going and how those dollars are going to athletes who in many cases are larger than the teams that they play for or than the leagues that they play in. Which is definitely changing and challenging the traditional sponsorship model. So all these resources are available at your fingertips on our platform, sponsorpulse.com. So go check them out. There's a lot more data there. There is a free tier, free forever. You can use it. We want to create transparency in our industry, and we think that credible consumer data, fan data is a really, really important pillar of that mix. So we encourage you to check it out. The data that you'll see today is largely from our platform, where we have over 18 countries that essentially make up 80% of the global GDP. And you can imagine every filter available with a growing consumer base of unique individuals that are contributing to this data that now exceeds, I think the latest poll is for over 2 million unique respondents. So check that insight out. And if you have any questions, reach out to us. We're always here to chat. So let's talk a bit about where the industry is. If you joined us last time, we talked a little bit about kind of like the state of sponsorship. Two Circles, obviously, many of you have probably seen a lot of Two Circles in the news over the last 6 months, certainly over the last month with the recent acquisition of Core Software, a big move globally, but also certainly in North America, given Core's kind of stronghold here. But one of the really interesting things that Two Circles published a little while ago was its projection for growth of the sports sponsorship industry. And they've called out that the industry, they project it to grow to $260 billion from 160 today over the next decade or so. A lot of really interesting insight in that report and a lot of reasons to believe behind the growth that we expect to continue to see for this industry. But at the same time, as we're projecting that growth for sponsorship and for sports, we're also seeing something on the other side, which is the marketing budgets. Neil, if you don't mind going to the next slide, we know, and we're continuing to see that there's a tightening in the marketplace when it comes to marketing budgets, because we've seen that budgets have fallen to a post-pandemic low. And so how can these two things be true? I mean, they can still be true at the same time, but it certainly puts a lot of stress and strain on ensuring that we've got data and insight to guide us in the decisions that we're making. And it's certainly, a big part of building a brand today in the global world that we live in is how do we build a brand that's going to stand out globally beyond, the confines of a particular country. So how does this all happen simultaneously is what we're going to start to unpack over the next little while. We know we've got an incredible series of global events that are going to take place over the next several years. Obviously, in North America, we're all very excited. Soccer has never had a bigger moment. I'm sure many people on this call are probably sick of hearing about soccer already, and we're not anywhere close to the hype that we're going to get to given FIFA 2026 is around the corner. But that's just one of several tentpole events that are taking place across the globe. You think about what this means for building a global fan base. That's really why we're here today, is to talk about the impact of, having these events take place in different areas and what different properties are doing to continue to build their fan bases. Because as you'll see on the following slide, there's been no shortage of an increase in properties, expansion teams, new leagues, new formats of traditional sports that are challenging the norms. And what this is doing is creating a bit of a perfect storm where there are so many options for fans today. If you like a particular sport, there are several different slices of that sport that you can go and be exposed to if you want a bite size, or if you want a different format, or if you're really passionate about the individual as opposed to the team or the league. It's really giving consumers endless options, which is great from a consumer perspective, but it is also really important that we remind ourselves that we're competing in a very fragmented market. Where there are a lot of options and where, trying to capture share of attention is really what it's all about. And that's of growing and increasing difficulty. So what are we seeing in the marketplace today? And then we'll get into the data. Some of you may have seen, if we have hockey and PWHL fans out there, the PWHL just announced a takeover tour that they're going to take on the road. They're going to take these teams on the road and expose several different markets to the product, to the players, to the league, and to the competition there. What an interesting way that they're trying to essentially build their following across North America first and foremost, and to see which different markets have and respond in a way that's really interesting. You've got essentially what happened over the weekend, whether you like the fight or not, we won't get into that. Whether you were, into the way that it was streamed and some of the challenges that were experienced. But the reality is that we've got boxing, essentially taking over what was projected to be somewhere in 60, 70 million households in, a pretty unprecedented moment for the sport, But where did this come from? They created essentially an event and a marketing campaign to build the hype, and they certainly got the attention. Whether it delivered on what we wanted to see or not is completely, another point, but they certainly built up the hype for this particular event, and they've done it across the globe, which is really quite fascinating. Now, if you look at the teams or the leagues that we're all, proving that we focus on a fair bit, you got the NHL taking their product across the entire globe, from as far as Melbourne in 2023, several different global series challenge events that they've taken across Europe as well, trying to build based off of, the talent and the passion for hockey in different markets. You've got beyond the NHL, you've got the NFL taking their product to Sao Paulo, to London, to Munich. Obviously, a growing importance, and they obviously have their international marketing program that obviously gave different teams rights to go and market themselves to specific countries, so that they're being fairly tactful with how they're approaching the market and giving each team opportunity as opposed to everybody fighting for that same marketing dollar. You've got, the MLB World Tour going to London. Beyond that, you've got the NBA that went to Paris and to Abu Dhabi. So you've got this kind of this crazy amount of sport taking place in these leagues that are generally centered in North America, going global and trying to fight for fan bases. But how do you stay relevant? How do you keep on top of, right? You've then got the streaming wars that are heating up for those of us in Canada, with Prime taking on Monday Night Hockey, and how and what that's doing for access to following that particular sport in this market. You've then got the social and the athlete side of things. It's fascinating, but Ronaldo's the number one individual on Instagram. Messi is right behind him. And then I'm probably going to butcher his name, so I apologize. Virat is a cricketer, and he's got over 270 million followers. So think about what that means in the way that you can connect with a global fan base, but that's really centered on an individual and not a team or a league. You've got the rise of new platforms like Overtime that are really challenging the way that content is created and the way that people are experiencing that content. So this makes for this fascinating moment in time that we all live in, and that we have a privilege of being a part of in some way, shape, or form in sport and sponsorship. But ultimately, what we want to talk about today is, why are people doing it? Why are we racing to build a global fan base in 2025? And that's where I'll leave you in Neil's capable hands to share the data and the insight behind what we're seeing from a consumer's perspective.
And thank you, Adam. That was awesome. I think the why is pretty clear. It's the billions of people and the billions of revenue dollars. And we're going to start to talk a little bit about what that means and how to do it right. Adam, thank you for setting us up. Adam took us through a bird's eye view of things. I am now going to swoop down onto the sidewalk and start to look at the consumers and the people who are living in each of these global countries that we're going to be speaking to. And we're going to listen in on what they're saying in terms of what their passion points are, how passionate they are about sports, sponsor sports, and then how the biggest entities from a sports perspective in the world have, and time will tell, but have accomplished what they are setting out to accomplish, which is really to garner that global fan base on a global platform. So before we get into it, and the reason that we're showing you these metrics, these are from our platform, and they're what we look at each and every day when we're understanding passion points of any property, sport, cause, culture, entertainment, lifestyle, anything extending out to a consumer passion point. Here's how we look at things. And then we're going to walk you through how sports delivers on each one of these. But this kind of sets the stage for that conversation so that we don't have to revisit each of the definitions. So we always start with engagement. Engagement is overall reach of a property, fandom, if you will. Okay, so that's how many people the either vertical or specific property like the NBA, NFL, so on and so forth, reach and touch from a consumer perspective. Okay, and then we start to work our way down the funnel in terms of not just looking at breadth of something, but as important and sometimes more important, specifically from a sponsorship perspective, is how passionate and engaged and intrinsic that fan base is. So the quality of that fan base in addition to the breadth of that fan base. That's where we look at things like intensity. Are people following it weekly or are they just following it occasionally? Momentum is interest building in the property. Excitement and passion, that's the emotional connection that fans have with the specific property. Just to remind everybody, when I do say property, and I think that we're all probably familiar with the term, but when I do speak to property, I'm speaking to leagues, teams, events, organizations, and those types of things. And then at the bottom of the funnel is from a sponsorship or brand perspective, can we drive impact as a result of an association with XYZ property? So will fans and consumers who are invested in that property feel better towards sponsors from a favorability perspective? And will they be more likely to buy or purchase that sponsor? Okay, so that's what we're going to be looking for and looking at. When we speak about our global numbers, which we will speak about pretty much through the entirety of this presentation, we're specifically looking at 8 countries, those that are highlighted there. The ones that are a little bit more grayed out, we do have available on our platform, which we'll speak to in a little bit. Okay, so our global context and numbers are from the 8 countries highlighted. There's always going to be a legend at the bottom, which tells you again what those countries are. Okay. So from an overall breadth perspective, I'm going to throw out just to make this a little bit of interaction. What percent of consumers across the globe do you think, age 13 to 64, because some, math head in the room is going to say, well, what's the demographic? Age 13 to 64, what percent do you think follow at least one sport annually? Hopefully somebody's gonna play this game with me. All right, I think somebody did. What do we got, Adam Mitchell?
That was just me asking the question to everybody. So nobody has yet participated, but I
Somebody
am betting that
participate.
somebody throw a percentage or a number of fans.
Some
70%, 70%. Wow, that's two guesses. 70%, 82, 65, 74,
Okay, we have
90.
players. There are chips on the board.
Jeez.
Um, and most, based on Adam reading out, are close, if not exactly bang on. 72% globally of consumers follow at least one sport. That's 1.27 billion people in the 8 countries we looked at. But remember that we also look at intensity. So not enough just to say, every now and then I tune into a sport. What percent say that they follow sports weekly? And that number from a percentage of the entire global population is just over half of the population, saying that each and every week they are turning in or tuning into at least one sport, which is nearly a billion people. Okay. So we're starting to paint a picture in terms of the size and scale and scope of the sport landscape. Then we look at momentum. So what we then did is we said, okay, anybody who said they're a sports fan, we're going to take out of the equation. So that 72%, we're going to take out of the equation. We're going to just talk to non-sports fans and we're going to ask them whether or not they think they're going to start following any sport. And yes, there will probably be a chat. What sport specifically do you think they'll follow? We'll get there. For now, 14% more people say that they are going to invest their time and energy into sport going forward, which is an additional 254 million people expected to come into the world of sport as we know it, bringing us well above that 80% mark, should they all tune into things like Jake Paul or Logan. I don't know which one it is. One of the Paul brothers fighting Tyson. Okay. Adam, feel free to, if there's questions, to reach out and ask.
Right now, we're getting a lot, or well, we're getting a comment around the power of soccer, and somebody who believes that soccer is the sport in the world, which I'm sure we'll get to momentarily. If you have other
We'll speak to it.
predictions, if
Soccer
you have
is,
other predictions, throw them in the chat. And I
did
should
they
call
ref
out that both Andy and Marcel were the two first to respond to the previous question and nailed it 70% bang on. So kudos to both of them for
Excellent.
answering quickly and accurately.
So the person referring to soccer, are they referring to it as soccer or football?
Soccer or
Yeah,
soccer or
yeah. I
depending
mean,
on
it's
where you are in the
global.
world, football.
Football. Let's
Yeah,
go football.
football. Anyways,
Okay, we'll keep going. So then we start to look at the audience that makes up this fan base. And what we did in each of the countries that we looked at, we said, okay, from a currently engaged, so currently sports fans, do sports fans over or under index as male or female? And if in any one direction, by how much? Current engagement, current fandom of sport is significantly over-indexing with male consumers. Okay, in and across most countries, India is the closest to parity, but then you see specifically and especially North America, Japan also, more males currently engaged with sport. But remember that one of the questions we asked about was momentum and interest. And is your interest in sport gaining? Do you think you are, or are you becoming more interested? So we took momentum and we looked from a momentum perspective at the same difference in gender, male versus female. And it's flipped. Majority, almost across the board, of countries and momentum in sport and increasing interest in sport is being driven with females and with women. Okay, so that's where a lot of those new audiences are really picking up steam. And it's important, obviously, as we start to plan our way forward to know those types of insights because we're going to be speaking to not just men, but women as well as we start to enter into the global stage from a sports perspective. Last down our funnel, Adam, you look like you want to, are there questions? Okay. Last down our funnel, we always look at impact. So from a sponsorship perspective, we've just talked a lot about the strength and the size and the scale and the scope of sport, and that momentum is being driven by women. But from a sponsorship impact potential, what impact can sponsors expect to have? Does sponsorship matter? Can it drive purchasing? And the answer to that question with over half of consumers globally is simply by associating a brand with a property that people are passionate about and like, you will drive purchasing and increase purchase consideration with those fans and with those consumers. Now, that's before a solid and great activation enters into the equation. It's before a solid and great positioning that really touches on the passion points enters into the equation. That's a result of halo from being associated with sport being something that 72% of people right now love across the globe, and that number could start to exceed 84 or 86% going forward. So that's a little bit of a lay of the land. I told you, we're going to swoop down onto the sidewalk and talk to people. We're going to continue to do that, but we're going to do so with a magnifying glass on the five biggest sport properties in the world by revenue. Okay. So we're going to start with a case study on the NFL. NFL's total global revenue, this is from secondary sources. We can give you those sources afterwards, is 18 to 19 billion dollars. Okay. Of the five leading sport properties, it is the largest. We first look at engagement because this comes back to, important part of how we succeed on a global stage. We look at engagement and fandom and passion in the home country, so in the United States, and where it ranks. So in the United States, 62% of consumers are fans of the NFL, making the NFL number one of all sports properties in the United States. Key priority markets, and I know it changes almost daily. Like the NBA just announced something a couple of days ago, which we'll get into. But as we had it, it's London, Brazil, and Germany, and key actions that the NFL has taken, and Adam had spoke about it earlier, beyond broadcast, inaccessible broadcast, which we'll talk about in prime time, international games, playing in those countries has been key and critical. Any questions so far? My chat thing keeps on falling down, so it's okay. You'll let me know. Yeah, okay. I get excited. So now let's take a look at, so that's what the NFL is doing. Secondary searches, anybody, with a computer or a mobile can look up those types of things. But now let's talk about whether or not it's resonating and working, whether it being the NFL and growing their fan base globally is working and resonating with consumers. So we're going to specifically look at the NFL in the UK and three important factors which for us and our system and model start to shape whether or not something is strong, passionate, and impactful. We start with engagement, which is overall fan base, and we know that right now, as of to the first half of 2025, 24, I believe. Engagement in the NFL or with the NFL is 31%. So 31% of the UK consumers are fans of the NFL. That is predominantly driven, because again, we go to quality of fan base and who are those fans of the property, by younger males. So first 19 to 24, then 25 to 39 males. That's the sweet spot who are on high income from the currency perspective. That's engagement. Then we also look at the trends. So we have been measuring in the UK, the NFL specifically since 2020. This is again from our platform. We look at excitement. So we first see reach and then we say, okay, but are people getting more excited about it? Are they becoming more passionate fans of the property? And we look at and see a significant increase in excitement with the NFL in the UK from 2020. So it's up 6% since 2020, which again is obviously a positive trajectory. Then we look at the impact. Will it and can it matter to brands that want to associate themselves with the NFL in the UK? The answer is yes. Again, simply by association, 1.4 million people in the United Kingdom say that they would be more likely to buy a sponsor of the NFL. That is up since 2020. But critically and importantly, that doesn't mean that everybody can succeed. So what we do next is we say, okay, what are those top five categories? And by the way, with every top five list, there's a bottom five list. We're not showing you the bottom five. We're going to keep things upbeat. But it is as important for, especially if you're not one of these top five, to see where you fit from a can I drive impact perspective. So vehicle rental, banking, sport retailer, sport betting. I'm going to give it away right now. Sport betting is on every single list, and I think it's probably one of the only ones. And credit card are the categories from a sponsorship perspective that would be most impactful to a partnership. Oh, you're on mute, Dan.
I'm on mute. One thing that I just thought I'd call it because there's like a good side chat. We're getting some people sending us messages directly. We're also getting people sending messages to the total group. But one of the questions I asked was like, do people think that the NFL can grow sustainably in other markets, whether it be Europe or otherwise? And I think one of the points that Abby made that was really interesting was just around will it take a team being located there to actually grow sustainably, which I think is something that a lot of these leagues are going to continue to grapple with. It's one thing to show up and to be there once or twice or three times or however many times a year. It's another thing to not have like that deep-rooted fandom for a specific club or a team, or for the players of those teams. So it'll be interesting to see whether I
There's
don't
a
think we're
ceiling.
probably, yeah, and I don't think we're
Yeah,
necessarily far off from some of these leagues considering having teams overseas, right? Logistical
absolutely.
nightmare, but is it the price that you pay to have a real, true global fan base? So we'll see, but very interesting comment, and yeah, keep them coming.
Yeah, and I mean the real news, the reality of things is that it has grown to 31%. So it wasn't always there. So we don't know what that ceiling is. I think that there probably would be without having feet on the ground a ceiling. But again, time will tell, and that's I think why you're seeing so many properties start to enter into markets by actually having regular season games. Okay, English Premier League, number two, $12 billion from a revenue perspective. Again, we look at engagement in its home region, which is the United Kingdom, 55%, ranked number one. Okay, so it is best in class in its market. The United States is a priority, not necessarily the only one, but a priority market for the English Premier League. Some of the ways in which the English Premier League has started to make its way into the United States started when 20, not started in, but a big deal was in 2022 with a media rights deal with the NBC, which is 2.7 billion. And they're also playing summer series, having games. There are tournaments going on, and we know the size, strength, scale, and scope of soccer, football in the United States. Is it and has it worked? I'm going to speed up a little bit just so that nobody gets bored, but not too quickly. So from an engagement perspective, again, you talked about that ceiling earlier. 35% are fans of the EPL in the United States, so that 33% came back. We're going to get higher in just a second in a different market. Who are fans? Again, it is a younger male fan base. This time with kids in household, not necessarily higher income. Excitement has head in the right direction at plus 10%, which is, even stronger than the momentum you saw with the NFL in the UK. And then from an impact perspective, again, it can be very impactful. It's headed into the right direction with sponsors and sponsorships, but again, a specific list of categories that are lowest hanging fruit. Sport betting, I promised you, was going to be across the board, but like the list that we have here is very different than the list you saw earlier. Now it's power tools, mortgage, tequila, which is having its day, and luxury vehicles.
Right, one thing
Go ahead.
quickly. I just want to call it out because I mean, I don't know if people have seen it. I just asked the question. I don't know if anybody has seen the "You're in It Now" campaign that the Premier League just launched in the U.S. But it features Will Poulter, and it's a really fascinating piece of creative. So would encourage people in the industry who haven't seen it to like take a look. Creative's obviously a very subjective thing, but like it was a really interesting way that they're trying to build, that passion for Premier League, capitalizing on the growth of soccer that we're seeing in North America with FIFA coming, with MLS, with NWSL, and so on and so forth. So it's worth a watch if you can pull it up online afterwards. But yeah, onwards to the MLB.
Major League Baseball. So number three on the list, 10 to $11 billion of revenue, ranked number two in the United States behind the NFL for those who were paying attention earlier. Priority markets, London, Mexico City, Seoul, and Santo Domingo, which are, I believe, all countries where there was a series from a World Tour perspective played. And the World Tour is in addition to players, one of the biggest staples for how it's making the MLB its entrance into these various markets. So we look at spotlight on Mexico, whether or not and how much it's resonating. 51% of consumers in Mexico are fans of Major League Baseball, a little bit of an older fan base, right? So you saw in the other two case studies and examples a younger male fan base right now. The Major League Baseball from Mexico perspective is a little bit older with kids in household. Momentum and passion are headed in the right direction. And then impact potential can be impactful. Sport betting number one. And then again, you see that list of priority markets. Go ahead,
Neil,
Adam.
one quick question that somebody from the crowd asked was just, do you mind talking about how we get to the top categories? Like, how do we define and how do we get to like
Absolutely.
which ones are the leaders who have the
Yes.
most to gain?
Good question. Probably should have prefaced the entire thing with it. So when we go out, everything that I'll step back. Our platform is survey based. So we're speaking to the general population in each of these countries multiple times a year. And we're asking questions about various properties and their passion for. So, have you followed Major League Baseball in any way? How often do you follow? Are you impacted by a sponsor? All the way down the line. And then we ask people questions about themselves. Are you in the market to purchase a new car or truck? Do you every 3 months, are you betting on sports? Those types of things. So how we define, I promise you it's all going to come together and I'm going to answer the question. How we define the top categories is we look at purchasers or intended purchasers of each of those categories, and we look at the impact potential that the sponsorship can have on them. So amongst people who are sports bettors, they are the most impacted or would be the most impacted by a Major League Baseball sponsorship in Mexico, followed by people who are in the market for automotive parts, followed by people who regularly purchase sports drinks, and so on and so forth. Okay, so it's all about purchase behaviors, what they're purchasing, and then how impacted those people who purchase those products and categories are by a sponsorship.
So if you're a rights holder on this webinar, then this is used to basically create your hit list and to know you have a very targeted narrative at every one of these categories that rises to the top. If you're a brand on this webinar, then we can literally look at your specific category of purchasers and compare properties and see which one gives you the greatest opportunity to connect with it. And if you're an agency who's doing one or the other or both, then you can use it for both purposes. But
We
that's at
got you
least how we
covered.
get there.
Okay, hopefully that answered the question. Hopefully. The NBA, The number four, we're going to start to fly through these ones. Number three, from an engagement perspective in the home market, we've all kind of seen some of the priority markets, Asia, Europe, Middle East, and Africa. A lot of what the NBA has been doing and is doing, number one, airing games during prime time, so giving access to people when they're not sleeping. And then also the development of programming and grassroots programming for kids and getting people starting to play the sport and invested in playing the sport. So we look at how the NBA is performing and has performed in India. Again, a very similar story. 50% of consumers in India are fans. Again, this time it's not high income, it's more middle income kids in household 25 to 39, which through those programming efforts seems to be resonating with the right audience, the one that the NBA has been going after through that program we just saw. And I'm not going to read you through all of the other stats and figures other than to say things are headed in the right direction. And like everything we've shown you, there is a kind of quick hit list of best in class top priority categories associated with impact. Indian Premier League, I'll speak to this a little bit quicker. So, from an ICC perspective, cricket overall, a market that they are investing in and really going hard at is North America. Okay. And I think that those who are living in North America have seen that. You've seen a lot of new sponsorships come into play when it comes to cricket. How the ICC is growing the sport on a global basis has been through a few different tactics and channels, one of which is getting more people to play the sport. The other is growing with women, and specifically women playing the sport. And then the other is going into the United States and hosting and having tournaments there as well. And we do see a lot of that working. We've seen the same thing in Canada. It is still more of a niche property, cricket and the ICC overall in North America. Right now, we're speaking specifically to the United States. So it's a 27% engagement rate, but it is one of the faster growing that we have on our platform in both Canada and the United States. Okay.
One
So,
question, sorry, Neil. One question
yeah.
that Amanda brought up, which I think is a really interesting one, is what type of assets are the sponsors taking up? So I think it's like whether it's social, digital, on-site. I think that like what we can say, man, is like obviously it varies based off of the rights holder and what they're able to offer. I think we're seeing more and more of like the digital social assets because they do transcend and they can cross borders. Obviously beyond broadcast, which is a little bit more complex. Our data continues to show from all the sponsorship impact that we measure across the globe that it requires incremental touch points. And it requires a lot more than just showing up with a logo to drive home the impact that you're trying to get. So we actually have proven time and time again, because consumers tell us that it takes at least 3 touch points to get the kind of maximum impact. And then, depending on how much you're activating, you eventually will see some diminishing returns. But ensuring that you're showing up with some element of exposure to drive the association, to demonstrate some sort of commitment and tie to the sport and to celebrate the moments is really kind of like the keys to success, so to speak, for activation. But it certainly is tougher to activate globally given the way that the broadcast world works. But a lot of the new technologies and new ways that content and live sports are being consumed are challenging that and making it easier for brands to get creative. If you saw MetaQuest, for example, in the boxing match, was literally it could be tough to miss. A great question though.
All right. Love the interaction. Let's keep the interaction going, make sure everybody's still awake. We talked about, you've seen this slide, so we're not going to ask you about this because that would be cheating. But we talked about sport overall continuing to grow on a global basis. So from a consumer perspective, we're now going to show you the top three sports or sport verticals, so specific leagues or verticals of sport that are seeing growth and momentum globally. Anybody want to put in the chat a guess as to what one of them is? We'll see if you're right. I'm not going to make you put all three. But before we give it away, anything, Adam?
First guess was Formula One.
Okay.
I was also answering another question around participation in sport and how we qualify participation in sport. Just to clarify that participation in sport and engagement are different, and that we have two different questions that we ask our respondents to ensure that we're capturing those separately. Somebody said golf, um, football, soccer, F1, paddle, or padel.
Okay.
I don't know if I'm ever saying it right, but those are in there. Cricket,
Okay.
pickleball.
I just wanted to see if people are still awake. They are.
They
We're doing our
are.
job. Perfect. Love it. Let's
Lacrosse, got to
continue going.
mention.
So let's look at three sports that are experiencing global growth. Okay. And we've looked at which three they are, both from a consumer context. So people saying they're becoming more interested in these sports, as well as from secondary sources and numbers. So one of the first that you see here, and I have the chat box covering my logo at the top, is rugby. Okay, rugby being one of the quickest and fastest growing sports from a increased interest perspective. From our studies and speaking to people, we know that 21% globally say their interest in momentum in rugby is growing. From what we've learned and what we've read, we also have a stat that people playing rugby has increased by 11%. You can read, but I'm still going to read it to you. Increased by 11% globally, 38% increase in the number of adult female registered players. So what we love to see is when things come together and consistency in terms of what we spoke about earlier, fandom, momentum, those types of things, where you saw, the biggest leagues in the world, really what they're doing to grow a global fan base. And then you look at something up and coming and they're starting to mimic that equation and recipe as it's successful. Okay, so rugby, not sure if anybody put it there, but if you didn't, next time you're playing Family Feud, put it on the list. Combat sports. This is before the Tyson Paul fight. Boxing is considered a combat sport. 19% increase overall. Set to hit from 8.7 billion in 2023 to about 12.6 billion in 2029. The overall market for combat sports. It is growing. The Tyson fight, I'm sure, well, it probably helped, at least from eyeballs perspective. I didn't love the fight, but we can get into that another time. Yeah, we'll get into it another time. And then there's women's professional sport. Okay, so overall, you see huge increases in strides, specifically from both a participation perspective, but also media coverage perspective. Tripling since 2019. If it continues, it could reach 20% by 2025. Huge growth from a consumer perspective in terms of interest, intrigue, and propensity to watch and follow women's professional sports globally and across the board. So, from a consumer perspective, those were the three biggest that we had tracked globally on a global stage, and we've just backed it up with data and support from my financial perspective. Mr. Mitchell.
Yeah, no, I think there's been some like great commentary and some people that are happy to see some of the properties, obviously, or sports on here in terms of growing. I think it's important to call out that it does change by market. We're looking at things at a global macro level for the purposes of a webinar to get through a lot of content. But of course, what's happening in Canada versus the US versus the UK versus France versus Germany versus China versus India, it's all different, right? So we're looking at things at a macro level, and if you're interested in getting down to what's happening in my market or in these collection of markets that are a priority, then we're always happy to chat because there's a lot of nuance there that can help guide your strategy and figuring out kind of where you want to go. But
Excellent
back.
point. All right. So, recipe for success, we're going to bring it all home and then open up the chat. Number one, and again, this is just based on what we've seen, everything we just went through, and picking out themes that seem to be resonating from a properties that are growing or have done a good job at securing a global fan base. Number one is solid foundation. Win in your home market. Kind of like get your own house in order before you start to extend and expand out. You look at some of the biggest leagues, in the world and those who are growing in, even rugby and those types of things and how strong they are where they started before they start to really venture out. Okay. Access, ensuring global markets get primetime access and coverage, have access to the moments of the sport, of the league, of the property when they happen, when they occur, not after the fact. Participation. So here's that difference, and Adam had brought it up earlier. Engagement, we define as overall reach. So access is reach for fans, right? Reach for people to follow the sport, not necessarily participate. Then you talk participation. So now people actually playing the sport, and that has been critical. And you see a lot of leagues really trying to get more like the rugby one we just talked about, like the NBA, like cricket, really trying to get more people invested in. You look at the NFL also, and the CFL really wanting to get more people invested in playing the sport. And they've gone the route of flag football, right? Because it is still playing it, for some, it's a little bit safer um, way to get people to learn the game and really invested in playing the sport. And, flag football has been a huge part of the NFL success at doing that. Athletes bringing in star power, right? Notable athletes from home countries who have done big things, giving them presence and really getting them to back what we're doing in terms of growing that sport, because that's that authenticity and validates the sport and that it can be done on that level. And there's pride. There's pride behind your favorite athletes from your home country, and then targeting, knowing your audience, right? It isn't just young men. It's women who are growing the fastest. In some areas, it's a little bit of older consumers. It's high income. It's various categories. You got to know your target as a brand, as a property. So as a property going in, who do I have the best shot with to start to grow the property with? And as a brand, which properties and sports are my consumers going to appreciate me the most for being involved with? Okay, which both come down to targeting and knowing your audience. We're going to leave you with this QR code. It feeds you right into our platform, the free subscription tier. Our platform is 18 countries deep, $99 a month, under $1,000 a year for one country and one user. So feel free to hold your phones up, take a picture of that, and all of this data in which we just shared could also be yours.
If the price is right.
If
Um,
the price.
so quickly, like a couple of final thoughts. We'll like open it up. One, thank you for obviously sticking with us and for engaging a lot of amazing questions. And obviously people are passionate about the topic. I asked the question of like which brands do you think are actually like killing it right now? Who's doing it well? We had somebody say Emirates, Qatar Airways, Etihad, like anybody else that jumps to mind. Red Bull, Visa, MasterCard, Emirates, so a couple of other mentions there. Prime, as an Amazon Prime. Like it's interesting because the brands, some of them are endemic to sport, but I think some of the brands that are starting to stand out are also kind of new categories, new brands that are shaping and kind of finding their way through sport. One of the things that I quickly will touch on before we call it, if you have questions, please throw them in. If you have to go, obviously go. But one of the things I think is like we'd be silly to not point out is that there is a ton of fragmentation, which is kind of like the first point that we made when we set all this up. So this is exciting. We're all bullish about the industry for good reason. There's nothing like live sport. There's a reason that sports sponsorship continues to grow. And why advertisers and brands are finding the business case to put their dollars into live sport versus just programmatic media or whatever you want to call it, any other kind of vertical or vehicle to connect with consumers. But the fragmentation also causes a lot of potential challenges, right? So I think there's going to be a growing conversation around how do we carve out white space? How do we find opportunities to really break through, because it's going to get tougher and tougher for brands to justify the investments if the investment required to break through continues to grow. So just something that I think is worth kind of noting and keeping our eyes on. We certainly are in terms of looking at how certain sport teams, even leagues, are looking at breaking down exclusivities and allowing multiple players and categories to be a part. Is that working, or is it making it harder for brands to actually get the benefit because consumers don't really know who's the actual sponsor? So just an interesting thing to keep in mind. We did a state of sponsorship survey 2 years ago, and the one area that was of greatest concern to sponsorship professionals like all of us was we all essentially agreed, or the vast majority of us agreed, 45% of us said that non-sport properties offer greater white space and opportunity to own. So that's something that we should keep an eye on, that we're keeping an eye on, and something to continue to revisit. We had some other mentions to that question: Carlsberg, Coca-Cola, DP World, Rolex. Any other questions anybody have? If not, we'll give you 10 minutes back and we'll say thank you. We appreciate all of the engagement, the questions, and you guys sticking with us. If you have questions, reach out. You'll get a recording of the webinar and of the deck so that you can obviously sift through it. Reach out anytime. We love talking all things sponsorship. And let us know what you want to hear next. We're listening to you and trying to do more of the content that is going to be useful to you and worth showing up for. So reach out with any questions, comments, feedback, good, bad, indifferent. We'll take it all in stride. So thank you guys, and all the best.
Thanks, everyone.
For your afternoon. Take care.
Bye, everyone.